Before the first star was sparked in the velvet black, there was a roar within the silence. He didn't just witness the creation of the universe. He was the architect of every atom, every ocean, and every gasping breath you've ever taken. But then, the unthinkable happened. The word that carved the canyons and ignited the suns became bone, blood, and breath. He descended into the dust of our camp, a king draped in the common cloth of humanity, walking toward a destiny that would tear the heavens open. Most of the world didn't recognize him, but for those who did, the ordinary was about to blush. From turning water into the signature of the kingdom, to standing over a 4-day-old corpse and commanding the grave to let go, the light has arrived to invade the darkness. And the darkness? It never stood a chance. This is the tectonic shift of history. This is the Word made flesh. Inside this Word was life, not a flickering candle, but a blinding crystalline light that defined the soul of mankind. It is a light that does not merely illuminate, it invades. It pierces the absolute gloom of our existence, and though the darkness has clawed at it for eons, the darkness has never grasped it. The darkness cannot extinguish what it did not create. Then came John, a man stained with the dust of the wilderness. He was not the light, but the echo of it. He stood in the parched desert of the human spirit, crying out that the true light was coming, the architect entering his own building. Yet here is the mystery. The world was crafted by his hands, but when he arrived, the world did not recognize him. The Word pitched his tent in the dust of our camp, a king draped in the common cloth of humanity. We have glimpsed his glory, not the terrifying radiance of a thundercloud, but the grace of a son who mirrors the Father's heart. Beside the churning waters of the Jordan, the witness, John, stood trembling. He did not see a conqueror on a stallion, but a man walking through the heat haze. "Behold," he cried, his voice cracking against the silence of centuries, "the Lamb of God, who takes away the sin of the world." As Jesus stepped into the river, the heavens tore open. The Holy Spirit did not strike like lightning. It descended with the haunting elegance of a dove, its wing reflecting in the rippling water, coming to rest upon the beloved. In that moment, the scent of the divine drifted into the nostrils of those nearby. Andrew and Peter, simple men of salt and scale, felt the tectonic shift of history. They followed, not because they understood, but because their souls recognized the shepherd's gate. They came to see where he stayed, unaware that they were stepping into a fire that would consume the world. Who can behold his glory and remain unchanged? The scandal of the wine in Cana. The ordinary was destined to blush in the presence of its creator. To understand why what happened here was a tectonic shift, one must look at the 6 stone jars standing cold and hollow. These were not mere water pots. They were the apparatus of the law, used for ceremonial purification. They represented a system of external washing that could never reach the internal rot of the human heart. When the wine ran out, the joy of the old covenant had hit its limit. Then the Word spoke to the water. In the silent alchemy of his will, the molecules of the mundane obeyed the command of the eternal. What was poured out was not merely wine, but a signature in dark crimson, a sign that the banquet of the kingdom had begun. By using the jars meant for cleansing, Jesus was signaling the end of an era. The best was being saved for last, and the old containers of religion were about to be filled with the new wine of the Spirit. But the light does not only celebrate, it purifies. From the joy of the feast, he moved to the shadows of the temple, where the Father's house had become a den of brokers. This wasn't a petty grievance. It was an eviction notice. With a chord of zeal and a voice like a coming storm, he overthrew the tables of greed. This was the first hint of the coming violence of the cross. "Destroy this temple," he challenged, speaking of the bone and breath of his own body, "and in 3 days I will raise it up." The mystery deepened under the shroud of night. Nicodemus, a master of the law, came seeking the source of the signs, only to be met with a riddle of the Spirit. He spoke of wombs and age, but the king spoke of wind and water. To see the kingdom, one must be unmade and remade, born not of the flesh, but of the breath of God. For as the serpent was lifted in the desert to heal the dying, so the Son must be lifted up, a beacon of life for a perishing world. The sun hung heavy at high noon over Sychar, a white-hot hammer striking the dust of Samaria. Here at the ancient edge of Jacob's well, the King of Glory sat down, not on a throne, but on the sun-baked stones of the earth he created. He was tired. The Word made flesh felt the ache of the journey, the dry sting of the throat, the human frailty of a long road. When the woman arrived, moving through the shimmering heat to avoid the eyes of her neighbors, she found a Jewish man who asked for a drink. It was a request that shattered centuries of racial and religious segregation. But Jesus did not want the water from the deep, dark shaft of the earth. He spoke of a gift that defies the bucket, a living water that does not sit in a cistern, but leaps within the soul like an eternal spring. "Sir," she whispered, her heart beginning to tremble, "give me this water." Then came the exposure. With a single sentence, the prophet laid her life bare. 5 husbands in the shadows, and a man now who was not hers. Her secrets, buried beneath years of shame, were suddenly illuminated by the true light. In the thermal intensity of that noon sun, she realized she was talking to the very source of the water she sought. She looked into his eyes and saw not condemnation, but a harvest. Fields, white and ready, were standing right before her. She left her water jar, the weight of her old life, and ran back to the city she once feared, announcing that the Messiah had finally arrived at a common well. The logic of the blindness. In the shadow of the sheep gate lies Bethesda, a place of 5 porches, where the broken gather like autumn leaves. Among them, a man has waited 38 years, a lifetime of watching others step into the stirred waters, while he remained anchored to his paralysis. The light of the world does not wait for the water. He speaks a word that shatters nearly 4 decades of despair. "Get up, pick up your mat and walk." In an instant, the invalid is gone, replaced by a man carrying his past on his shoulder. But it is the Sabbath. To the keepers of the law, the miracle is invisible. They see only a man carrying a mat. They see a violation where there is a visitation. When they find the healer, their interrogation meets a claim that shakes the very foundations of the temple. "My Father is always at his work to this very day," Jesus declares, "and I too am working." The scandal is no longer a broken rule. It is a claim of equality. He does not merely represent God, he reflects him perfectly. He gives life to whom he pleases, and he warns that the very scrolls they study, the law of Moses they weaponize, were written as a testimony of him. They search the scriptures for life while refusing to come to the one who breathes it. This is the tragic logic of blindness. The closer one is to the light of the law, the more blinded they become if they refuse the light of the person. The lines are drawn. He has called God his own Father, making himself equal with the Almighty. What price will the shadows demand for such a claim? The shadow of the Passover lengthened across the hills of Galilee as 5,000 souls followed the light into the wilderness. They hungered for a king, but he gave them a sign. 5 barley loaves, 2 small fish, meager offerings in the hands of the architect of the stars. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the hearts of the people hardened into a demand for earthly rule. He withdrew to the mountain alone, leaving his disciples to battle a churning sea in the dark. In the middle of the gale, he came to them, treading upon the chaos as if the waves were solid glass. "It is I," he whispered through the spray. "Do not be afraid." The next day, the mystery deepened into a stumbling block. He told them he was the bread of heaven, not given by Moses, but by the Father. Then came the words that turned the world away. "Unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in you." The scandal was too great. Many who had followed him walked away, leaving only the 12. When he asked if they too would go, Peter's voice trembled with the weight of the eternal. "Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of life." Yet, even in this circle of intimacy, the darkness crept. For among the chosen sat a devil, waiting for the night, the war on midnight. The Feast of Tabernacles arrived like a storm over Jerusalem, a city of flickering lamps and desperate thirst. In the center of the temple courts stood the light, but the shadows were closing in. They brought her to him, a woman caught in the act of adultery, her shame a weapon in the hands of the self-righteous. "Moses says, 'Stone her,'" they hissed, their eyes burning with the cold fire of legalism. But the word did not speak. The King of Glory bent down and began to write in the dust. A finger, once used to carve the tablets of Sinai, now traced secret truths in the desert of the temple floor. "Let him who is without sin cast the first stone," he said, and the silence was deafening. One by one, the rocks thudded into the sand as the accusers melted into the gloom. Left alone with the broken, the light whispered, "Go and sin no more." As he walked the dusty paths, he encountered a man who had never known the sun, a man born into a midnight that lasted a lifetime. Then the Creator leaned down. With the same hands that fashioned the stars from nothing, he gathered the dust of the earth. He spat on the ground and kneaded the clay, smearing the cool, silky black mud across the man's sightless eyes. "Go," he said, "wash in the pool of Siloam." The man obeyed. The water cleared the earth from his face, and for the first time, the world rushed in. A violent, beautiful shock of blue sky and golden light. But the light of truth blinded those who lived by the letter of the law. They interrogated the miracle, demanding a reason for a healing on the Sabbath. They threatened, they doubted, and they pressured his parents. Yet the beggar stood firm. "One thing I know," he declared. "I was blind, but now I see." Only those who know their own darkness can truly enter the gate. Bethany was a village, drowning in the scent of morning. For 4 days, the earth had held Lazarus. To Martha, Jesus spoke of the cosmic. "I am the resurrection and the life." But to Mary, who collapsed at his feet in a heap of raw sorrow, he gave his tears. Watch him there, the architect of the universe, he who spun the stars, standing before a hole in the limestone, weeping. He was not just mourning a friend, he was mourning the very intrusion of death into his creation. Then the grief turned to a divine, righteous fury. "Take away the stone." The air was heavy with the warning of decay, the stench of the fourth day. But the light of the world does not fear the dark. With a voice that echoed through the foundations of Sheol, he issued a command that the grave had no authority to refuse. "Lazarus, come out." And the dead man walked. See the white linens fluttering in the wind, the strips of burial cloth trailing behind a man whose heart was beating once more. It was the ultimate sign, the sevenfold seal of his identity. Yet, as the village erupted in joy, a darker shadow moved in Jerusalem. Death had been defeated in a garden, but the plot to kill the life-giver was now cemented. 6 days before the lamb was to be slain, a dinner was held in Bethany. Lazarus, the man who had tasted the grave, sat at the table. But it was Mary who understood the hour. She brought 1/2 liter of pure nard, an oil so costly it represented a man's labor for a year. She did not pour it on his head to crown a king. She poured it on his feet to prepare a sacrifice. The house filled with a scent so thick it seemed to drown the air. Judas Iscariot breathed only the cold dust of greed. He calculated the cost of the perfume, while the Son of Man calculated the cost of the soul. The king with a towel. The hour had arrived, heavy and humid with the scent of the coming Passover. Inside the upper room, the light of the world was preparing to go out. The transition began not with a trumpet blast, but with the rustle of a discarded robe. Jesus, knowing that the Father had placed all things under his power, stood up from the table. He did not reach for a scepter, he reached for a towel. He wrapped it around his waist and began to descend. Imagine the silence. The only sound was the rhythmic splash of water and the drip falling from a king's fingers onto the calloused, dust-caked feet of fishermen. In this basin, the hierarchy of the world was inverted. The king served, the master bowed. But even here, the shadow deepened. Among the 12 pairs of feet Jesus scrubbed was the pair that had already walked the path of betrayal. As they reclined, Jesus' spirit grew troubled. He dipped a morsel of bread and handed it to Judas. With that bread, the darkness took hold. Judas stepped out into the air, or perhaps more accurately, he stepped out into the abyss. And it was night. Deep in the shadows of the upper room, the king speaks of sap and soil. "I am the true vine," he whispers, "and my Father is the gardener. To live, you must abide. Apart from the vine, the branch is a skeletal thing, fit only for the fire. But if you remain in him, his life becomes your life. Greater love has no one than this," he says, looking at the men who will soon flee, "that one lay down his life for his friends." But the world has no room for this friendship. The air in the room grew thick, vibrating with the sudden shift from the temporal to the eternal. This was the great intercession, a bridge of words built over the abyss. He prayed first for a homecoming, asking the Father to restore the glory he held before the foundations of the world were laid. Then, his vision expanded across the centuries, reaching through the shadows to touch every soul who would ever believe through the words of these few fishermen. The prayer ended, and the silence of the garden began. The Garden of Gethsemane was a sanctuary of surrender. The torches of the temple guard flickered like dying stars as the traitor led them to the Word. Jesus stepped into the light and asked, "Who is it you want?" When they answered, he spoke 2 words that shook the foundations of the earth. "I am." At the sound of the divine name, the soldiers collapsed. Power flowed from the Lamb even as he offered his hands to be bound. In the chaos, Peter's zeal flared into violence. But the king who was about to die for his enemies healed a man who came to arrest him. Then came the cold wait in the courtyard, where the rock crumbled. As the rooster's cry pierced the dawn, the sting of betrayal was complete. The scene shifted to the cold marble of the Roman Praetorium. There sat Pilate, a man of power, staring into the eyes of a bloodied king. "Are you a king?" Pilate demanded. Jesus answered with a voice that seemed to come from before the world began. "I came to testify to the truth." Pilate's scoff echoed through history. What is truth? The architecture of the end. The hill is called Golgotha, the place of the skull, a jagged altar where the Roman hammer meets the nails of the world's rebellion. Here, the King of the Jews is lifted up, not upon a throne of gold, but upon a splintered beam between two thieves. The sky, unable to witness the Creator's agony, begins to bruise and blacken, turning the noonday sun into a cold midnight void. At the foot of this wreckage, the cosmic family is redefined. Jesus looks down through a mask of blood at his mother and the disciple he loved. "Woman, behold your son." Even as his lungs fail, his heart remains the shepherd. Then comes the great exhaustion. Every prophecy, every shadow of the law, every drop of sacrificial blood converges into this single, gasping moment. He knows that the work of the Father is complete. "I am thirsty," he whispers, receiving the sour wine of human bitterness one last time. Then, a cry that shakes the foundations of the deep. It is finished. He bows his head, handing over his spirit as a king surrenders a conquered city. A soldier's spear tears into his side, releasing a sudden, dual stream of blood and water, the fountain for sin and uncleanness. The light of the world has been extinguished. Or has it merely returned to the source? The light did not die in the tomb. It merely waited for the dawn. Early on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene found the stone rolled away. She stood weeping until a figure spoke a single word that shattered the silence of the ages. "Mary." In that whisper, the recognition was instantaneous. The teacher had returned. He appeared behind locked doors, breathing his peace into lungs heavy with fear. He offered his side to the trembling fingers of Thomas, turning doubt into a confession. "My Lord and my God." By the Sea of Galilee, in the gray light of morning, a charcoal fire crackled on the shore. The disciples hauled in a miraculous catch at his command. There, amidst the smell of smoke, Jesus turned to Peter. 3 times the fisherman had denied him by a fire. 3 times the king asked, "Do you love me?" The world itself could not contain the books required to record his glory. Every step he took was a heartbeat of the divine. Every word, a pillar of a new reality. He has finished his work, leaving the tomb empty and the heavens open. He is the Word, the Light, and the Lamb, and his voice still echoes in the quiet of the morning, calling your name across the water. The script of the universe is written in his blood, and the final period has been replaced by an invitation. He is standing by the shore, the fire is lit, and the invitation is eternal. Follow me.